So this is a video I've been wanting to do for quite some time, but I keep putting it off as I really wanted to get my thoughts together, as this is an important topic. Now, as you can probably guess, my audience is overwhelmingly young males, probably in the late teens to early 30s range. Some people a bit older, some people a bit younger. Maybe I have one or two female viewers, but that's the audience, and that's who watches me. And as a result, I get quite a few requests for life advice from people, be it about finances, school, maybe family, jobs, that kind of thing. And I really appreciate that, by the way. And if you've ever messaged me about that, thank you very much for the trust you put in me. And I think people ask me because they see me, hopefully, I hope correctly at least, as someone who's going to be real with them and give them sincere advice, and not just a meme answer or the ideologically correct answer or something like that. So as with anything I say on this topic, you don't have to take my word for it. If what I say seems reasonable, go ahead. If not, think about it yourself. But here are kind of some just things I've found in my time on this earth that are very helpful. Now, the first thing to keep in mind is you have to try to control your sense of guilt or disappointment with yourself, particularly with regards to feeling directionless. A lot of people, and I know I'm like that, will be in high school and they're like, I don't know what I want to do for the rest of my life. I don't know what career I want to go into. I don't know if I want to get married and have children. I haven't had a girlfriend. How am I going to afford my house? A house someday? And they're just going a mile a minute and they have no idea what they're doing. And there's a tendency in those situations for your brain to shut down. And it's not just at that point in your life. This happens all throughout your life. You could have a moment in university where you're like, oh dear, I hate this subject that I was going to study and that I wanted to do a career in. Where do I go in my life now? How am I going to earn enough money at this to support a family? That sort of thing. Maybe they're in their late 20s, early 30s, and they haven't had a relationship yet. And they're like, is it too late for me to have one? And that sort of thing. And to that, I just say something you have to accept is that probably a majority of your life is outside of your control. There are obviously a lot of things you can control. You can control how much effort you put into things. You can control what you choose to do to with your time to a certain extent. There are definitely decisions, particularly regarding your personal behavior, but a lot of life is God's will or fate or the actions of other people or society or something like that. Like, of the major jobs I've gotten, one came from a referral, one was something I found through a posting. Well, sorry, two were from what I found in a posting, and the third one was through a recruiter. So in that case, half of it was directly me, and the other half was just kind of happenstance or indirect result of things that I'd done. And kind of my current field, I kind of bumbled into it as I was in university and I didn't really know what I was going to do, and I just kind of kept my eyes and ears open, and then something just kind of came up and I decided to go with that. So I'm not saying don't be active, don't be doing research, but in a lot of cases, either through happenstance or because your brain is able to kind of process things and get you to accept your situation or come up with a way to change your situation, it's probably going to resolve itself. And getting upset about it and going into shutdown mode doesn't help anybody. I'm not telling you to be lazy or anything, but excessive guilt, just kind of completely melting down, doesn't help either. So that's number one. And that's easier said than done. I know I suck at that, but just keep that in mind. Number two, if at all possible, try to have a good relationship with your parents. There's a reason why honor thy father and thy mother are in the Ten Commandments, why it's a core aspect of pretty much every major religion. At the end of the day, the family precedes society. The mother, the father, and the child comes before civilization. It comes before countries, towns, nations, whatever. And they are your support unit. They are your primary sources of inspiration. They are the ones who nurture your growth. They're the ones who provide for you. at least in a functional family and a functional society. So, if at all possible, try to have a good relationship with your parents. Tell them you love them, tell them you appreciate them. Try not to fight with them too much. I mean, everybody gets angry at their parents, everyone fights with their parents. That's part of life, but you should try to nurture a certain gratitude and respect for your parents. If for no other reason, then it should mirror the respect and gratitude you have for your heavenly Father as well as your temporal ones. Now, that being said, a lot of people have parents they can't have good relationships with. Maybe because they're criminals, maybe because they're dead, maybe because they're degenerates or drug addicts or just sociopathic pieces of crap. And in that case, it sometimes is better to just cut toxic people out of your life. If you can't have that relationship with your parents and you've done what you can, you just have to accept that it's probably not your fault. It's just kind of the situation. And you just kind of have to accept that and try to move on. And if you can, try to find that influence somewhere else. If you're a male, maybe an uncle or a teacher or even an older male friend or something, try to cultivate a close relationship with them. Because you need that strong masculine influence in your life. I know, as I've said many times, for my part, growing up with a father who went to work every day, even if he didn't want to, even if he was tired, because he felt it was his duty to provide for his family, was an immensely positive thing. Boys also need mothers to kind of even them out and to provide unconditional love. So if you don't have a parent for some reason, then try to find a substitute if you can. Once again, this is all subject to reality. So I guess those are kind of my first two pieces of advice. Third one I would say is try to, as much as you can in your situation, have a relationship with God. Now, I'm Catholic, so obviously I would prefer if you were Catholic, but whatever religion you're interested in, so long as it's, well, within a certain limit. Like if you're Orthodox or Protestant or something, or evangelical, I think it's better to engage with a religion, generally speaking, than to not. I find, and you've seen this with prison and Alcoholics Anonymous and stuff, a connection to a higher power is one of the few things that can completely change somebody. I know when I became a Christian, I started going to church, a lot of aspects of my personality and my life changed. So I think most things are better than being religiously apathetic. So even if it's like some kind of lame Protestant church, it's probably better to go to that than to be an agnostic or an atheist or something like that. Even if you're like Buddhist or something, it's probably better to practice that. If for no other reason, then I think everyone needs to live by a code. Everyone needs to have a defined sense of what's right and what's wrong. And to understand that there are consequences both in this life and the next for your behavior. And I think just the sense of purpose that it provides is exceedingly important. So I do think you should make God, and once again, I'm a Christian, etc., but in whatever way you can, an important part of your life. I hope that didn't sound too new agey, but I try to not be super hard or hostile to other denominations of Christianity. So those are kind of a few personal things. Now, maybe let's move on a bit to finances and jobs and education. So I'm a big believer that everybody in their life should have to work a minimum wage job for, 6 months, at least a certain amount of time. I think it sucks. You don't make money. It's often long hours, or it's short hours spread out at inconvenient times. But if you come from a privileged background, or even a non-privileged one, I think it's important to understand how a lot of people in your society live. Maybe you come from an upper middle class background and your family can just pay for your school and you don't need it and they'll buy you what you want. But I think the experience of going through that struggle teaches you a lot of compassion and teaches you a lot of understanding for people who are less fortunate than you. I know, having gone through the experience of working at a movie theater and dealing with customers and that kind of thing, I became a lot nicer towards minimum wage staff, and I started tipping more than I did previously. I think it's important. I do think, and maybe this is a generic conservative talking point, it is good for kids to earn their own money, to have to learn to spend the money responsibly, because it's not just money that they're given, it's something that they physically earned, and it has, I guess, a certain value to them. And they have to decide, okay, this number of hours of work translates into this, is that worth it? And I think that's invaluable, regardless of what level of society that you come from. I also think it's important to, as soon as you can, to start saving money. If for no other reason, then this is a very good habit. Because the way compound interest works and investing works, the longer you save money for, it gets exponentially, it's exponentially better. So when you get your first job, there's a lot of good places you can start investing in. I don't really advocate, I guess, savings accounts to a certain extent. Maybe have like a separate savings account as like a rainy day fund. But even if you're young, maybe open up a account with a robo investor that'll automatically invest the money for you in like a diversified range of products, and just have it sit there. And maybe when you're going to go to school, or you want to buy a house or get married or something further down the line, or just to start your retirement. And even if you put 5, 10, 20 bucks a week in there, and that's going to add up over time. And the security of knowing that you have a bit of money in your back pocket is invaluable. I've always tried to have some in investments and stuff like that. And when I go to work, I at least know if I get fired, if something happens, I'm not going to immediately wind up on the streets. And part of that is also obviously your family, which is your primary social safety network. And there's other stuff. But there is something, I think, and I don't think this is greed, but to look at your account balance and go, I earned that money. I made the disciplined decision to not spend it, and I can watch it grow. So that's kind of another thing that I think is important, and it's a habit. And I think if you're going to get a credit card, you should make the habit of paying it off almost as soon as you purchase something. Because the truth is, in a lot of cases, you just kind of need a credit card, because most online things, well, I guess there's like PayPal and Digital Interact, but you're probably going to need a credit card. You're also probably going to want to get one just to start building your credit when you're young. But just pay it off. A lot of people say, oh, well, it's better if you balance things and you pay one thing off and then you take, and it's okay to float some debt. I personally just prefer to have as little debt as possible. And maybe that's a suboptimal way of living, but to me at least, being able to sleep at night knowing I don't have something over my head, and a mortgage is a bit different because it's an investment and you can sell the asset and stuff. But yeah, so that's that. Now let's move on to education and job prospects. So the reality is, most people need to go to post-secondary education. Be that, I don't know how you describe it in America, but college or university or trade school or vocational school or an apprenticeship or something like that. If you want to have a successful life and a successful career, you're going to have to go for something a bit extra. And that's fine, and you should probably start, you and your parents should probably start planning for that financially. Earlier is better. If your parents start well, in Canada we call it an RESP, but if they start an account for your college when you're young, once again, you can just put a little bit in every month, and it'll be a substantial amount of money by the time you're 17 or 18 or whatever. But the biggest piece of advice I would give is, don't just go to university for the sake of going to university, which is what a lot of people do. Because a lot of people have been given the advice, As long as you get a degree in something, then you'll be good and you'll be able to get a job. That's not the case. That's not to say I do think education is very important. I have a lot of family members who work as teachers or principals or stuff like that. But it has to, if you're wealthy and you want to pursue an academic career and you're going to school purely for your own edification, that's perfectly fine. But just keep in mind that that won't necessarily pay the bills. So don't go to school to just get a BA or a degree in psychology or political science or history or philosophy because you want to get a degree and that's a topic you like. I think you have to be a little more strategic about it. Now, I'm not saying you should go to medical school just because that's where you make the most amount of money, unless you want to do that. But there has to be kind of a balance. Your goal is to try to find something that if you don't like or love, that you can at least tolerate and that won't grate on you and make you miserable. That you can also provide a living for. And sometimes maybe there's something in an adjacent field that you can work on that's similar to what you really would want to do in an ideal world. And you can always change later in your career. That's something to keep in mind. In general, professional experience at like a serious adult job normally trumps education. So if you go and get a degree in something, you do a couple years work at maybe something that's not ideal, but is a professional job, is maybe a reputable company, then maybe you can go do the job you really want to do. But I think you have to be pragmatic, you have to be flexible, you have to understand that in a lot of cases in the working world, you're going to have to put in some time. You're going to have to do shitty, low responsibility work at the beginning of your career. You're going to have to like be a beggar and not a chooser, but you should try to have something resembling a long-term plan. And once again, if you don't have an exact plan, that's fine, but maybe just think about it. Have some, even if it's a very, very loose idea in your mind, it'll at least help you sleep at night. And just always keep your eyes open for opportunities, what people around you are saying, what's happening in the news, what's happening in your industry. And because you may find something you want to switch over to, or you may decide to go do a master's or something like that. So just be open and be flexible. But generally speaking, work experience at a serious job is better than just going to have education for the sake of education. Now, when it comes to picking a field, I think something you should probably do is take a look at what average wages are at the industry, what the working conditions are like. There's that lame thing, doing informative interviews and going, if you know somebody in a field, go maybe talk to them, ask them what their day looks like, ask them if they like their job, maybe ask them if you feel comfortable, how much money they make. So I'd say just do kind of some secondary research. See what industries are growth, see which industries they expect to have careers in for a long time. Maybe pick something that's relatively future-proof, or that's not going to immediately get mechanized overnight. I've seen a lot of reports stating that there's a lack of truck drivers or logistical workers. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but unless they're going to implement automated trucks, that's probably a job that's going to be along for a while. And if it pays okay and you're someone who likes driving and doesn't mind being alone for long amounts of time, you can do that. There's no shame in labor. I think that's something that maybe a lot of people from the middle or upper middle class have, that it's bad to work with your hands, or there's things like being a truck driver that are kind of beneath you or stuff like that. But it depends on a lot of different things. Some people just aren't that ambitious. Some people don't look to their career as the source of their fulfillment in life. They look to their family or their church or their personal interests. And they're okay making, I don't know, 60, 70 grand a year, living in a relatively inexpensive state and having like 3 kids. And that's what makes them happy. They don't really have a desire to be the big tycoon. And there's nothing wrong with that. It takes all kinds of different people to build a successful society. So I'd say just look at growth areas, look at things that you can stand doing. Maybe look at things that have a long-term career path. Like maybe you go work in a factory, but you eventually want to do, I don't know, engineering or design or quality control or something like that. And that's your longer-term career plan. So that's kind of my advice in that regard. Once again, I think as soon as you get a job, it's important to start saving money. If for no other reason, then you need at least a minimal degree of discipline in your lifestyle. You never know what's going to happen in life, and having some cash, particularly in assets that are somewhat inflation-proofed or inflation-resistant, even if that's like gold and silver, although I generally like exchange-traded funds and that kind of thing. But that's something you should get on. Whether or not you decide to buy a house is once again up to you. Don't let the societal expectation that you're a loser if you don't own your own home really get you down and force you into doing something that you'll later regret. The truth of the matter is housing prices have risen exponentially over time, way faster than wages. So the reality your parents had of buying that house and being able to make the mortgage payments and that being the American dream, the white picket fence, isn't really the case in a lot of parts of the world anymore. And if you have to choose between renting and still being able to invest money in other places, or getting a mortgage you can't afford and being barely able to make the payments for the rest of your life, then you just have to do what you got to do. It's an uncertain economic environment. Inflation it's in doubt how it's going to turn out, or any of this other stuff. So sometimes flexibility is better, even if that might cost you something in the long term. So you might be in a scenario like a lot of people are in Toronto or Vancouver, where they bought a house for like 200 grand 30 years ago, and now it's like $1.6 million or something like that. And they definitely won in that regard. But who really knows if that's going to continue or not? And I guess kind of the last piece of thing people would ask me about is about girls. Now, I don't know anything about that. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be Mr. Macho or Mr. Patriarch or something like that. But I do think it's important to approach a relationship, relationships with most people, with something to offer. And I don't mean this in like, oh, to be your sugar daddy or something. But I think there has to be something about yourself, like you're funny, you're interesting to talk to, you have some kind of cool hobby, you have a shared interest or something like that. I think you have to have something to bring to the relationship, and to not just kind of be a complete and total loser in terms of your attitude, in terms of where you are in your life. A lot of people give the advice that if you focus on being like not fat and working and making money and living a clean lifestyle, the girls will probably follow, which I think there's probably a lot of truth with. It's something I don't really know that much about, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend to say that I know much about it, but I do think that if you're reasonably functional in most parts of your life, it's probably better. There was a girl I talked to who's a traditional Catholic, and she said traditional Catholic women are mostly looking for a dude who like somewhat has their shit together. Because like there's just so many spurgs and guys who are just kind of losers, and just somebody who's like mildly functional is kind of what they're looking for. I don't know if that's true or not. I just thought I'd throw it in because it was kind of a funny statement. So that's my honest life advice. You can take it or leave it. I hope something I said in there was helpful. That's just honestly what I've seen and what I've personally experienced. I'm not any kind of great success story myself, but I have a career. I have a substantial amount of money in savings. I have a good relationship with my parents, even if I don't really have many IRL friends or anything like that. I mean, that's just kind of part of it. You just have to be grateful for what you have. Because most people have something. And I guess if you don't have anything, then you can say that you have nothing to lose. I'll leave you with a quote from a magic card from Champions of Kamigawa, One with Nothing. When you have nothing, all things are equally possible.